So on this third Sunday of the Easter season, we continue reflecting on what it means to emerge. Like a butterfly pushing through the walls of its chrysalis, we are being called into a new way of seeing, of living, and believing. Today, our gospel text places us on a road. And for some, this is a familiar road. Now, I've never physically walked the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus, but I have spiritually walked the road of grief and questions and doubt about what God has done and is doing in this world. In today's gospel, we hear those two disciples walking that road from Jerusalem to Emmaus, talking with one another, sharing all that they have heard in Jerusalem about what God has done and what God may be doing. The Gospel of Luke tells us that one of the disciples is named Cleopas. He doesn't name the other. Often in Scripture, when there is an unnamed disciple, it means that's a woman. And there's a theological circle that assumes that this is Mary, the wife of Cleopas. There are some scholars who argue that this is the same Mary who's named as the wife of Clopas, who stood at the cross, comforting Mary, the mother of Jesus. And if that is true, then that means that this Mary and this Clopas, or Cleopas, are the same aunt and uncle that Jesus knew growing up, because this is the brother of Joseph. So if that's who these disciples are, they're not only talking about their rabbi, their teacher, they're talking about a person they have known since his childhood, someone they watched grow into being an adult, someone that they heard preach and believed in his mission because they knew that he not only preached with his words, he preached with his whole life. They were likely there at the beginning of Holy Week when he entered Jerusalem on the donkey and that glorious triumphant entry. And then they were there at the end of the week at the crucifixion. And now, just days later, they are walking home. They don't know for sure that the resurrection has happened. They have heard some rumors. And so they are walking through a fog of grief, losing their rabbi, losing the one that they had hoped would raise up their people from oppression into liberation and freedom, and also their beloved nephew. They are walking through the fog of trauma. Perhaps they are walking home because they intended to spend Passover in Jerusalem. But they are walking home having lost someone they loved. Yes, they've heard there may be an empty tomb, that some people had visions of angels, but nothing is clear to them. And so on that 7-mile journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus, they're in deep conversation, trying to make sense of it all. I imagine their steps were pretty weary. The heaviness in the bones that come not just from physical exhaustion, but from carrying sorrow that moves from your heart and expands to your bones. Luke tells us that they were talking with each other about all the things that had happened. It's that kind of conversation that happens when grief is raw. Retelling a story over and over, trying to make sense of it, wondering how everything could go wrong. And into that grief, Jesus appears. Only they don't recognize him. They think that this is just another stranger along the road. They don't recognize that they are walking with the very one that they are grieving. And yet they welcome him to walk with him. Isn't that often the case in the fog of our pain, in the fog of our grief? We miss the presence of the risen Christ who is with us in our pain, and yet we welcome our companions on the journey. And so Jesus walks alongside them on that journey to Emmaus. He doesn't rush their understanding. He simply walks with them. He listens to all that they talk about, and then he joins the conversation, and he opens the scriptures to them. This is how healing often begins, not with answers, but with listening, with companionship, with coming alongside people who are hurting and hearing their stories. And only then can we begin to talk too. So this stranger has joined them on their journey, and Cleopas explains, "We had hoped." And those words must have hung heavy in the air. They had great hopes that Jesus was the one who would redeem Israel, that it all meant something for the world. But now he has died. And then this stranger, gentle and patient, begins to interpret the scriptures. He shows them how the Messiah's suffering was always part of the story, and he reframes everything that they have been talking about, not by force, but by walking with them in their grief, and by helping their spiritual vision begin to open. Just like a caterpillar who can only distinguish light from shadow, their spiritual vision is not yet formed. They can tell that something is happening, but they cannot see clearly. And when the three of them reach Emmaus, the day is nearly over. And so Cleopas and his wife Mary, they offer hospitality to this stranger. Perhaps Mary has to hurry to set an extra place at the table and prepare that simple meal with bread and with fish. And then, at the table, it happens. Jesus takes that bread, he breaks it, he blesses it, and he gives it to them. And suddenly, their eyes are opened. They see that it is Jesus there, the risen Christ, their Lord, their nephew. There he is alive, shining with the light of resurrection. The transformation of Christ happened in the tomb, but the transformation for these two disciples happened in the breaking of bread. It was a transformation from confusion to clarity. Their vision has changed and they can see clearly now. Like a butterfly that has emerged from the chrysalis, there is no going back. The old world has passed away and a new one is now open to them. For those disciples, something begins to break open, not just their hearts that had been burning, but reality itself. They had hoped that Jesus would redeem Israel. They had hoped for a new kingdom, but what they got was something much bigger than their hopes. Now they know that death itself has been undone. This is Christ alive from the dead. The same one who broke bread with them as a child and young adult and young man has now broken bread with them and proved that he has broken the power of death. And when he breaks that bread, he opens their eyes to the truth of the resurrection. Like a butterfly emerging from darkness into the light, the disciples begin to see new things. They see Jesus not only with their physical eyes, but with a sudden spiritual clarity. What was once simply shadows and confusion becomes vibrant and unmistakable, that the resurrected Christ is here at their table. There's such a striking parallel between what happens on the road to Emmaus and the journey of a butterfly. Caterpillar enters the chrysalis and becomes something different altogether. And when the light cracks into that shell and the casing splits open, the butterfly must leave. It cannot go back. It cannot say, "I'm not ready." Once the process begins, it is time for new life to push forward. And so it is that day. On Easter morning, the walls of the tomb were broken not by human hands, but by divine goodness. And when that stone was rolled away, the light of God poured forth into the darkness of death and overcame it. Jesus emerged transformed and glorified. He could not go back into the grave even if he wanted to. He could not return to the simple life of an itinerant preacher from Galilee. The resurrection was not just about Jesus returning to the life that was. It was about the beginning of a new existence, the dawning of a reality in which death does not have the final word, in which despair is not all there is when it looks like all hope has been lost. There is always something more. And for those two disciples in Emmaus, that moment of seeing the resurrected Christ in their midst wasn't just a new chapter in their story, it was a whole new book. They could see the world with new eyes. Their spiritual sight had shifted. Christ's resurrection didn't just bring light. It revealed new colors they didn't even know had existed. It brought hope where there had been despair, life where there had been death, and a future where there had only been endings. And just like that butterfly that must push its way through, those delicate wings that they have weren't quite ready to fly. The disciples didn't feel ready to fly with Jesus there in their midst, but they must move forward. There's no going back to their old lives. For those disciples who had fished, they could not simply go back to being fishermen. Matthew could not go back to collecting taxes. They could not go back to the familiar routines of their lives before Jesus said, "Follow me." Because of the resurrection, their lives and the whole world has shifted. This moment is not just one singular moment. It is a journey that begins with grief and now opens into new glory. It's not the end of the story, it is the beginning of a new book. It is life now with the resurrected Christ there with them. But notice for those disciples who had walked to Emmaus, that moment, that shift, did not come through thunder, through a dazzling display of power. It came through something as simple as breaking bread. Jesus is not recognized in grandeur, but in relationship, in shared presence there at the table. There is something holy about the table when we share meals, when we share stories, and sometimes even when we share tears. It's there at the table that Jesus becomes known in our midst as well. We should never underestimate the sacred power of conversation between disciples and sharing meals with others and being present to the pain and grief that others have in this life. There is something holy about listening to others. And sometimes that's when our hearts start to burn again. When we recognize something holy in our midst, when we see the sacred in those ordinary moments of life. Like the disciples on that road to Emmaus, we do not emerge to new life alone. We need companions on the journey. We need others who can help us see when all that we see might be shadows, who can help us move into seeing the fullness and the vivid reality of Christ at work among us. Our shared stories, our shared meals, our prayers for and with one another become the lens through which we begin to see the fullness of God's kingdom here in our midst. We can experience God's grace when we hear how God is working in the lives of other people. That a moment in Emmaus and that butterfly's metamorphosis are not just past events, but they are ongoing truths that happen today. In moments of darkness, God is already at work. When our vision feels limited, God is preparing us for new sight. When we feel broken, God is working to birth something new and beautiful. We are being transformed. And so on this journey, we do not move forward alone, but we move forward with one another, sometimes disciples we know well, sometimes members of our own family, and sometimes we welcome the stranger who will come and break bread with us, who might help us see the risen Christ is not only on the road, but Christ is always with us. Christ is going ahead of us, preparing the next step for us in our journey of transformation. And so we open our hearts, we open our eyes, and we open our hands. to see the beautiful light shining as we are being made new. And there is no going back. So let us walk together step by step on this journey, trusting that God is at work. God is bringing new life even out of death and despair. Thanks be to God. Amen. So this morning I want to give you 5 minutes to sit with this gospel text. And you may want to journal if you like. There's some space in your bulletin to write. Or if you want to turn and talk with a neighbor, I have a few questions. And I'll start with the butterfly fact of the week. So caterpillars and butterflies have entirely different eye structures. Caterpillars can only tell the difference between light and shadow, while butterflies can see a huge range of colors, even ultraviolet light. That's why during the children's time I was talking about a butterfly could have a favorite color that we don't even know exists because they can see ultraviolet light. So how does transformation enable us to see the world differently? Perhaps with less black and white thinking and a broader spectrum of color. Or maybe you want to share what new colors Christ has revealed to you recently and how they're reshaping your understanding of God's presence in the world. And finally, in what ways can we as a community encourage one another to see beyond black and white thinking and embrace the fullness of God's light? So let us listen for what God is saying to us today.